Ladies, thank you for agreeing to this historic interview today.
Well, I could hardly pass up the opportunity to be in the company of these two remarkable women, whose faces I have not seen for far too long.
Far too long. And I completely agree. But although I'm very grateful, I still don't think I'm very sure of what this is about.
Well, I'm hoping we get a chance to remind women that there's still a lot of work to do. The Equal Rights Amendment still hasn't...
Good point, Miss Paul.
Oh, Alice, please.
Alice. And the reason I've gathered you all here, I'm writing an article, part of a series dedicated to the history of women's suffrage. And I decided to go right to the source.
How long do we have? You are talking about over 150 years worth of history.
Longer than that, and it's complicated.
Yes, complicated. Ida, could we talk about what happened in 1913?
Oh, I'm sure we'll get to that, Alice. But how about you each just start by telling me a bit about how and why you got involved in the fight for women's votes?
Why? Because when I was born in 1859, women were treated like second-class citizens. Women had no social, political, or personal rights, not over their property, their body, their marriage, their divorces, or even their own children.
Or education. College for women was seen as mostly laughable, even scandalous by some. And countless women agreed. So what were women trained to do?
Women didn't have any voting rights either. But if any changes were to be made, it was to cast a vote to get it. When I was born, it was the middle of the Civil War, and illegal to teach a black person simply to read or write. After the abolishment of slavery and the passing of the 14th and 15th Amendments, I enrolled in college until both my parents and one of my siblings had died of yellow fever. I left school to keep my 6 younger siblings from going into foster care. I worked many a job to make ends meet, but at age 16, I was paid so little. I was told if I was a teacher, I would make more. So I told them I was 18, and they hired me.
Good for you.
Now, when I graduated from college with a Bachelor of Science degree in 1880, I was the only female in my class.
Well, not surprising. But I have heard that more women receive a college degree than men these days. Bachelor's, master's, doctorates.
Oh, and you earned all 3, Alice, and in law, no less.
Not until I was 43.
Well, like Ida and me, you were busy fighting for the 19th Amendment, though we didn't always agree on our methods of fighting.
Very true. But in the end, we accomplished our goal.
And billions of women have been grateful to you ever since. Now, there were times that you put your lives at risk, I've read, and the 3 of you would actually get to see women in America get the right to vote in 1920. I mean, what was that like?
You start, Carrie. You were our president twice, and you were in Nashville when that young Republican representative cast his vote.
Ah, yes. Mr. Burns, thanks to his mother's letter urging him to be a good boy and help Mrs. Catt. Oh, but the journey to get there. After college, I taught for a while as well, and I was married and widowed twice. Oh, both good men who encouraged me in my suffrage work. I traveled the country, I made so many speeches, and then in 1890, I met Susan B. Anthony. That changed my life. 10 years later, she stepped down from the presidency of the National American Women's Suffrage Association, and she named me as her successor. It was 1900, and oh, I had my work cut out for me. Time and again, we tried and failed to get our suffrage amendment read in the Congress, let alone passed. But making a change in the United States Constitution takes time.
It takes grit to get it done.
And
patience and diplomacy. Your words, Carrie. Now see, that's where we disagree. See, when I was in England working with Mrs. Pankhurst, I could feel the grit of her suffragists. They were driven to step over the lines of propriety with public demonstration and civil disobedience because, as Mrs. Pankhurst said, they had tried everything else for years. And in America, we knew that after 70 years of patience, our movement was at a standstill. And as Mrs. Stanton predicted, my generation decided they could not wait another 70 years.
Mm-hmm. Fearlessness. Yes, I agree with you, Alice. Once my siblings were older, I took up journalism, became co-owner of the Memphis Free Speech, and wrote non-stop about the unspeakable lynchings in the South and the North. Eventually, a mob broke into our offices and burnt our printing presses. I moved to Chicago and continued to write and organize. Sent a map to Congress showing how many lynchings occurred in each state, ones we knew of. I co-founded the NAACP, and we demanded lynching be a federal crime. But state after state, president after president was passed over. You know who finally signed it?
I'm not really sure.
Joe Biden in 2022.
Really? I mean, that seems impossible.
Believe it! I became so passionate about the suffrage movement because I knew Black women needed the right to vote too. I founded the Alpha Club in Chicago, the first Black suffrage club in that city. But I wanted to do more.
And you did. In fact, can we go back and revisit that parade in 1913? I've seen some amazing pictures from that day. You were all dressed in white. I think I read somewhere it was because all of the newspapers were printing pictures only in black and white back then, and you knew that all that white would make a more dramatic statement. There you stand marching, wearing those amazing sashes you created.
ah, yes, the parade sash.
I wore my first one in 1913. You remember that, Alice?
Well, of course I do. Could I say a few words about that?
Oh, please.
In 1913, I helped organize the biggest suffragette parade ever. And we had women from across the states marching down Pennsylvania Avenue the day before Wilson was sworn into office.
So there were a lot of important people there and reporters.
We submitted all the proper documentation and we agreed to all the terms for a peaceful event. We didn't want to do anything that could get us arrested, like making speeches in public. We just wanted to hold an orderly march to show the country how many women felt they were entitled to vote. But we worked hard to get so many women involved.
But
even though 9 states were allowing women to vote at that time, the southern states were more opposed than ever.
they knew women's votes meant Black women's votes.
Exactly. Now, when Ida and her 64 delegates from Illinois came to the parade, I was thrilled to see them. But some of the other women protested. They said if Black women walked in the march, the South would be harder to win. I tried to dissuade them, Ida.
I'm sure you did, Alice.
But the other women threatened to drop out of the march, more than a few.
So I suggested to Ida that the Black suffragists walk behind the parade. I still regret that, Ida.
Well, I never did agree to that. But I stood on the sidelines, and when the Illinois white contingency marched, I joined them.
And I was glad you did, truly. And the Illinois contingency welcomed her enthusiastically.
Thank you. And while we're clearing the air, did I ever tell you that you inspired me, you and the others who had chained yourselves to the White House gates and suffered such abuse for the cause?
Ah, yes, the silent sentinel. More than 500 arrested, 168 jailed, beaten and worse, and then force-fed when you led that hunger strike. Oh, you would suffer for the rest of your life for that.
Well, we had come so far. And for 2.5 years, we had been staging those protests. We were willing to go to almost any extreme.
Eventually, we all were. And in 1920, when the House and Senate finally voted for female suffrage, and 35 of the needed 36 states ratified the suffrage amendment, it was still that same Southern fear of black votes that created another standstill.
I spent weeks invigorating those pro-suffragists at the meetings.
Oh, and I confess, when I learned that the anti-suffragists were liquoring up the state representatives in order to win their votes, I saw to it that there was plenty there for the pro-suffrage delegates as well.
Prohibition laws aside, fair is fair.
Whatever it takes.
And 3 months later, we all showed up legally for the first time at the presidential election.
Well, not all of us. It would take years for black women, Native American, Hispanic, Latina, Asian American women, and legalized immigrants to get their right to vote.
And of course, my Equal Rights Bill still has not passed.
So be sure and put that in your article. Women today still need to have their sleeves rolled up.
What was that you said, Carrie? We roll up our sleeves.
Set your mind to making history.
And wage such a fight for liberty that the whole world would respect our sex.
Oh, that's good. That's very good. Now, I need to write that down. Can you repeat that for me?